Hello and welcome. I'm really pleased you could join me for the latest episode of the Retirement Cafe podcast. Have you ever wondered how to go about tackling the tricky subject of getting older with loved ones who are doing just that? How to start those taboo conversations about whether dad should hang up his driving gloves, or what happens when an elderly friend or relative becomes incapable of living alone. This is the episode for you if that's the case. My guest, geriatrician Dr Lucy Pollock's speciality and passion is the care of older people. And she has written a wonderful book, The Book About Getting Older. A book which gives its readers the power to have those difficult conversations. So without further ado, take a listen to Lucy's insight into how we can grow old as happily and as healthily as we can. Welcome to the Retirement Cafe podcast, Dr. Lucy Pollock.
Thank you very much, Justin. Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Well, I think you're talking to me from, well, I won't say deepest, darkest Somerset at the moment, but I'm not actually sure where you are in Somerset. Is that right?
I'm about in the middle of Somerset, and it's light and bright, so it's a lovely day, actually.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, I've been really looking forward to our conversation. And before, I know a little bit about you, and we've done a bit of research. But for those who don't know you, Lucy, what do you do?
Okay, I am an NHS consultant geriatrician, which means that my specialty for the last really quite a long time, because I qualified in 1990. So for many years, my specialty has been the care of older people and their families, because older people do not usually come alone, although some do. And I do general medicine as well. So when I am on duty on call, I look after all age medicine. But my absolute specialty and my passion is the care of older people, most of whom have got a load of different things the matter with them.
Yeah. Now this is going to be really interesting because we're recording this in February 2023, and there's a lot going on in the world, isn't there, for older people?
Yeah.
Now, would I be right in saying that you are hospital-based?
I am. I work in Taunton, and I have always been hospital-based, although for the last year or so I've been working on a very exciting project, which is hospital at home for frail older people. That's not a new thing. It's new to Somerset, but there are areas in the UK that have been doing hospital at home for a long time, and it is very exciting because it is so often so much better for somebody to be treated in their own home. There's a lot of patient choice in there. There's quite a lot of risk in there. You have to hold your nerve. And there are interesting questions about how we resource it and make sure that it actually works and doesn't just put an enormous burden onto families and leave people feeling anxious at home. But when it works, oh my golly, it is a wonderful alternative to coming into hospital. Much as I love hospitals, they are not the right place for everybody. But yes, you're right. Most of my career has been in the thick of it, in acute medicine, care of older people wards, frailty units. I've worked with patients who fall over. I've worked with people who have multiple problems with thinking, with delirium or dementia. I work with people who've got terrible hearts and terrible kidneys and terrible lungs, and often all three of them all at once. And I work with people who are getting better, and I work with people who are not going to recover. So it's incredibly rewarding and interesting and varied. Yeah.
Now there's so many. Just with what your initial statement there, you've so many things I'd like to unpack. Now, I think the first thing, this work you've been doing about with caring for people at home, we've heard quite a lot about that in the news this week, I think, as though this was kind of a new initiative, i.e. this is going to release a bit of pressure on the beds in hospitals. So tell me more about that.
It's really interesting that it is rather being held up as the sort of new sort of panacea, and it's what's going to rescue the NHS. That isn't the case. But what it does have is a very good place in among the treatments and things that we have on offer for older people. So it's been going very nicely for probably about 10 years in some places. The key is it is not what sometimes it's portrayed on the news as technology based. It can be for younger people with single conditions where perhaps you just need your oxygen saturations monitoring and that can be uploaded and the nurses in the hospital can watch that. But for frail older people, this is a very people based service. You need good nurses, and we have fantastic nurses. We need more, and they need to be very well trained in looking after people with complexity. We have fabulous physiotherapists on our team. And if you've got the right people doing the work and going in to see somebody every day, sometimes more than once a day, and they've got the right care in place, and you've chosen your patient carefully, then what the good evidence is that you get the same or better outcomes in terms of whether you survive or die or go into care or need extra care and so on. So, survival and good survival is as good or better as being in hospital, and the cost is the same or less. Okay, it may not be less, it may be the same or less, so it isn't going to save lots and lots of money. It has to be properly funded, and the most important thing is the experience for the patient is often miles better. So as good or better outcomes, the same or less cost, and a better experience for the patient. And yes, of course, the reason the NHS England and the government are interested in it is, of course, that we want to keep people who don't need to be in a hospital bed out of hospital beds, because, oh my golly, we do need those beds.
And I know when I've spoken to some dementia experts in the past and the things that I've read, again, dementia is a have been able to stay in your own home when you start suffering from that, again, is another kind of I suppose this is a repeat thing of, like, if let's stay in our own home and get the care that we need, it's really significant in improving our lives.
Absolutely. I mean, for some people with dementia, there is a right moment to move into care, and it can be an extremely positive move. It's right for the family and it's right for the person, and it's a great success story. And, there are superb care homes out there. I have a particular passion for good care homes. They are very neglected and unsung heroes. So, sometimes that is the right thing to do. But for most people, and certainly for people with dementia who have an acute illness, who suddenly become more confused or drowsy, and they're unwell with an infection, for example, which they're going to get better from. They need antibiotics and they are going to get better. Oh my golly, keeping them at home is better, because you'll hear this phrase deconditioning when people are in hospital and they're not moving around. And I say to my patients, your muscles are going to turn into spaghetti, or your muscles are going to melt away. And they look down and they can see their muscles are melting away. You need to keep moving, and being in hospital is a difficult place to go on moving around. Also, all of that thing about the familiarity of your environment and being able to make your own cup of tea and knowing where the loo is and knowing what's going on at night, those are really important things for people, especially with dementia. So we know that they are a very good group to look after in their own homes. And the other people that we sometimes forget are people who are in residential care homes. That is their home. That's where they live. They're with people that they trust and like and are familiar with. And again, hospital at home can be very, very good for them. The care's already in place. If we can provide the IV treatment that they need and not send them to hospital and make some good decisions about not doing a scan, for example, and accepting that risk, that may be a very good decision for that person.
Yeah. And I can imagine, of course, also for the social aspect, visiting a hospital is fraught with everything, isn't it? I mean, even if I've got to think about it now, I've got to go and see someone. What time can I go? When do I go? How do I get there? Where do I park? Whereas if I can pop round and see Frank or Bill or whoever I want to go and see, I can pop round and say, knock on the door and go, is it convenient? Much easier to have that kind of community aspect to someone who's not so well.
That's very true, and there are good communities out there, as you know, Justin, and we're trying to build up the strength of small and large communities in cities as well as in little villages and towns, to try and rebuild those social connections, because some of them got strengthened in COVID when people were looking out for one another, but also people did get isolated and lost contact with their neighbours, and trying to rebuild those connections is really important. So taking the opportunity, as you say, to, if you've heard that somebody's unwell, just to pop round and hammer on the door and say, is everything okay? Is there anything I can do? Nice to see you. Have a chat. Oh my golly, those make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the other things that you mentioned right at the beginning was and something that I'm very, very aware of, and you do cover off in your book, which we will mention in a little while, but the classic a fall or a trip, and then everything goes downhill, and this is something that I've observed with elderly relatives, we've spent a lot of time talking to people about one of the things I'm quite passionate about is strength training, trying to really encourage people to stay strong as they go on. Again, something else you cover in your book. I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but I think these things are all linked. But you mentioned about a study, I think, in Australia, where if you can walk 3 miles an hour or what have you, the significant improvement in your health, and I'm thinking that this is all connected.
Very much so. I mean, you've hit on a really important subject, which is that we know lots of things about how to make people live longer. And there are lots of things like anti-blood pressure tablets and so on that will make people live longer. But the things that make you live independent and maintain your independence, which is what most people really mind about, the only thing that has been shown to do that, to make you go on being independent and live a healthy longer life expectancy, that is activity. It is getting off our bums, and we have become very, very sedentary, and COVID has done us no favours at all. I think if you kind of could put a tape measure around the nation's bum, you would see it has grown. We are sitting around and we need to get moving again, and we can put people off if we're not careful. So I noticed you didn't use the word exercise, and I tend not to. People think, oh my god, I've got to put my pull my leotard on and get in my lycra, and that's not the case. This is about doing small amounts, and actually people who already run a marathon don't gain much from running another marathon, but my golly, the people who actually are very immobile, do very little, and that's a lot of us who just do not stand up all day, you can make a huge difference by doing a little, and it's such a good message, and really important, and you can do it with joy, and you can enjoy it, and it's not just good for your heart and your lungs and your muscles, it's terribly good for your brain, and you can be companionable, and you can feel proud of yourself. And I don't know, I quite like feeling smug, and I feel very smug when I've done something that has made me breathless and done me some good. So yes, it's a very important message, and it's a true message. There's really good science behind it.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this in your kind of 50s, 60s, entering into retirement, you're thinking, my gosh, this there doesn't sound a lot to look forward to. This decline into later life.
I know, and you think, God, all I've got to do every day is take my pills and floss my teeth and do press ups. Jeepers, that's not much of a life, is it? So no, it is interesting, and we can talk about getting older now. I have noticed something. Most people are very happy, and once they start talking, particularly about older people that they're worried about or looking after, or older people talking about themselves, it's a very good subject, and they feel a huge relief about talking about it. And I watch the weight come off my patients' shoulders or their family's shoulders when we tackle some of the tricky things that have become a bit of a taboo and are things that we don't talk about. So for people in their 50s who are often worried about older parents, this is a very good subject. For people who are in their 80s who are there already, they love this subject. You're talking about me and my friends. This is good. I like this. For people in the gap in between, I think it's an interesting space to be, because you may not be worried about your parents anymore, and you kind of know you're the next generation, and you don't want to think about it, and that's fine. I wouldn't make anybody. I've got friends who say, I'm going to make my mother read your book, and I think, well, please don't make your mother read my book. She does not need to read this book. And you come to these things at the right moment. And I sometimes watch people with this book in their hand. They're given it by somebody, it's pressed into their hand, and you see a look in their eye, and I can spot it, and it looks like a horse cantering towards a fence that it has already decided it's not going to jump. And the horse is still going forwards, but it's got that look in its eye that's going, I am not doing this subject. And yet, actually, there are a few things that if we do talk about them, they're niggling worries, and you don't want to acknowledge them, but they are niggling worries. If you get them sorted out, you don't have to worry about them anymore. So it's not something you have to think about all the time, but there is a little bit that you can do where you say, right, I'm going to make some plans, I'm going to put some things in place, and then I'm going to park it and I'm going to crack on with enjoying all the things that I have listed that I am going to do in retirement. Fabulous.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the kind of mental models that I use with people is you may be familiar with it, but it's called the inversion model, and it's has people coming into retirement, and I say to them, so you may not exactly know what an ideal retirement is going to look like, because it's difficult to imagine. First of all, it's a big transition, and second of all, the next 10, 20, 30 years could be full of ill health or all types of things going on. I say, well, what would be in the most horrendous later life? How could it be just awful? Let's just try and design the worst later life that we possibly can. And they're looking at me, think a bit strange. And I'm going, well, I'll start. Let's eat really badly. Let's drink too much. Let's not take any exercise. Let's not have any friends. Let's not have any community. Let's, and they start kind of enjoying that. Okay, let's start enjoying the game, I suppose. And we create right. So in essence, once we've done that, what we do know is we want the opposite. So how do we make sure we're part of a community? How much do we? Maybe we don't. It's walking not our thing, but maybe we want to walk with a golf club. Maybe walking in the hills is and golf club isn't a thing for us. But how do we actually? What if we look at everything we don't want? We then can look in the mirror and go, okay, so now we understand what we do want.
I think that's brilliant, Justin. I think that's a really good thing. I've got a question recently that I've been asking people. There's lots of things out there for giving if you could go back to your 18-year-old self, what advice would you give them knowing what you know now? And I've changed it a little bit, and I ask people at the moment, if you could write a birthday card to your 80-year-old self, what advice would you put in it? And people often, they go a bit quiet and they have a good old think about it. And one of the young people that I asked that question to, it was very touching. She said, try not to forget the things that you enjoy. And she said she'd just gone to university and she had forgotten how much she loved singing at school. And she hadn't joined a choir and she'd forgotten to sing. And it was just a little example, but it was so true. It's very easy for us to fall out of doing the things that we enjoy, and actually re-engaging with those at any age it can be a really lovely thing to do. So there's a lot more to that advice for your 80-year-old self, but we can talk about that later.
So Lucy, obviously a busy medic in a busy hospital, consultant, and probably there may be a shortage of time in your life. I can imagine you're extremely busy. When you finally get the opportunity to have more time in your life, what will you do?
Oh my golly, I do have quite a long list, actually. That's a lovely question. So I've got about 1,000 books to read. I want to spend a lot of time with family and friends. I want to be in my garden. I'm looking out at it at the moment thinking, jeepers, that needs some attention. I'm really looking forward to that. I want to learn some bird song. I learn about one new bird song a year. I'd like to learn some more of those. I'd like to travel. I want to do some very slow train travel across Europe. I really look forward to doing that. I don't know, I might have the odd lie-in. I'm in life in retirement. I want to volunteer. I'd like to spend some time, perhaps actually having spent a lot of time with older people. I do also enjoy the company of younger people very much, and I will miss my medical students and the young nurses and therapists that I teach. So there might be something about doing that. And being part of my community. I live in a lovely village which is full of activity, and I feel I don't contribute as much as I would like to that. So that's another thing I'd like to do. So I think I might be quite busy when I'm retired.
Fantastic. That's marvellous. Now, turning to your book, the book about getting older. Now, I haven't read all of it. I've been through it. I think it's fantastic. What brought you to writing this?
I wanted to write it for about 25 years, to be honest. I first wanted to write it when I was standing outside the Whittington Hospital in London, and I'd had a couple of conversations that day, one with a very old lady who was not going to take the medicine that I was suggesting she take. She was a very powerful, strong person. And then I also had some time with a family who were trying to speak on behalf of somebody who couldn't speak for themselves, and actually they didn't say what they needed to say, and I realised particularly in that second meeting, that the power was in the wrong place and that I knew a lot and that they didn't know. And the important thing was that they didn't feel that they could ask some questions, and they either didn't have the words or they didn't have the permission to ask some really important questions. So it's a book that I wrote in my head for a very long time. I obviously had to go and learn some stuff. I mean, I knew some. I say I knew lots then. I didn't know lots. I knew some medicine, but there was loads I didn't know, and there's still loads I don't know. But I did learn lots looking after people for the next couple of decades, and then I wanted to write it. So really, that book is about giving people power, because information is power, and it's giving people some good stuff, some useful things, some things it's worth knowing, some questions you can ask, some ways you can ask them, some conversations that you can have as a family that can be difficult, but if you have them, my golly, you feel so much better. As I say, that weight off your shoulders. So what are the words that you can use? So I use stories to explain it, and then I also explain some of the science and the ethics of what we're doing with older people. You know, what is the guidance? Who takes the Hippocratic Oath? You know, that kind of stuff. And the answer, by the way, is absolutely nobody. So.
I do think you're absolutely right, and I know you touched on the book about having these conversations early, and you know, we all have different perspectives as we age. I mean, you know, my 50-year-old self is definitely very different to my 30-year-old self, which is definitely very different to my 20-year-old self. And, you know, I absolutely appreciate my 80-year-old self is going to be extremely different to where I currently am. And with the knowledge of the inevitability as time passes that we get older and our vitality, I suppose, possibly reduces, and maybe our mental capacity reduces. It's what we generally observe in our elderly relatives and friends. Actually having those conversations in your 60s, I go, you know, when this happens, this is what I would like to see. This is the help that I think I'll need. This is where I want you to sit me down and go, okay, you know, Dad, it's probably time to hang up the driving gloves. You know,
Yes, yeah.
showing my age now. Anyone who has driving gloves, I don't know. My father did. But you know, actually, at what point, you know, let's have these conversations early. And I often have I always suggest to my clients, we have a little drawer, and in there is marked, you know, last will and testament, power of attorney. This is where you're going to be able to access this information and that information, and you may never have to pull open that drawer,
Yeah,
but it's there.
It's so good. It's an insurance policy, isn't it, Justin? That's exactly it. So making these plans, you know, plan it and park it, that is a good idea. So, and it's a kind thing to do. Everybody, you know, people profess to love their children and they say, oh, I don't want to be a burden. Well, one of the ways that you can do that is just do a little bit of sorting out, and it doesn't have to be masses, and it doesn't have to cost a fortune, but actually, if you just make sure that your family, the first thing is a conversation about your wishes. So, you know, one of those conversations that just makes a big difference about if you had an incapacitating stroke. That's something that people really fear. If you weren't able to speak for yourself and you weren't able to swallow and your outlook was very poor and it looked as though you were going to not make a recovery, where do you stand on that? And having that kind of conversation with a family, I think, is a very helpful thing to do. And then obviously the practicalities of just make a will. And if you possibly can get round to it, do your LPA at least for finances, because that makes a huge difference. So those things it's a good idea to have in place. I think there is an interesting thing we have to be careful about, which is that younger people misjudge older people's quality of life. So sometimes we look at older people and we think, I would not want to be living like that. I would not want to be housebound and, you know, watching daytime television and whatever else. And we make some very prejudiced judgments about people's quality of life. And if you ask older people themselves, they will judge their own quality of life often a great deal better than a younger onlooker would. So we do need to be a little bit careful about that, because we can, if we're not careful, be prejudiced about our future selves. So we can make decisions now that may actually not be applicable when we're 80 or so. So these things do tend to be a little bit fluid. But at the same time, I think most of us feel that we can make a decision that we would like to stick to, and that, you know, it can be reviewed. None of these are set in stone. You can always change your mind and tell people and write things down differently. But I think for most of us, just a good, honest conversation with the family is a very good start. What I should say, of course, there are people who don't have families, and I'm increasingly approached by people who are single, and they say, "You keep talking about family. Why do you just assume that everybody's got a family?" And they don't. There's a wonderful organisation, I don't know if you know about Aging Without Children, AWOC,
Yes.
which is terrific and are doing some really good work on
We've
that.
had them on the podcast.
You have, brilliant. So that work about building up other relationships, which may be professional or friendships, that can give you some security, I think, are really important.
Yes, yes. And of course, as we've got this aging demographic, of course, that, hang on to talking to those younger people, because, of course, there's going to be so many of us who are older, with the decreasing birth rate and the aging population. There's going to be plenty of people to hang out with.
Yes, and so we need our friendships in our own age groups, but it is actually, this intergenerational work is really interesting as well, because we, particularly in the UK, do live in a very stratified society, and it's very interesting that a lot of young people do not have friends who are older, and yet those friends can be incredibly precious. And I was talking to a friend the other day about, we all know that young people are good for old people. That's fine. You see 4-year-olds in care homes, yeah, you all know that's fine. But actually, why are old people good for young people? And sometimes we forget that. We're very naughty as a society about portraying older people in a negative light, when in fact, of course, what older people are repositories of history and of family and of place and of understanding what somewhere looked like some time ago, with the pressures on the natural world, listening to people talking about the bird life or the amphibian life of their childhood. That's really important, and also full of joy and funny stories. My life is full of laughs, you wouldn't believe it, but honestly, we roar with laughter. My patients tell me very funny, interesting, different things, and I learn from them all the time. And one of the most important things that we learn from older people, I think this really is important, we are all exposed to images of perfection all the time, and our children are very much so. From their earliest childhood now, you have to, get top marks in your SATs, and you've got to get your brilliant GCSEs, and you've got to get perfect A-levels and a perfect degree and a perfect boyfriend. You've got to have a perfect body, you've got to have perfect teeth, perfect clothes, perfect holiday, perfect infinity pool. It goes on. And even in midlife, I think increasingly we're looking over our shoulders thinking, am I doing this right? I should be more perfect. And older people know that that isn't how life works. They know that life genuinely is a roller coaster, and because they've got to the end of the ride and they've often kind of almost stepped off and they can see the whole picture, they are aware that life has its ups and downs, and that when things go bad, they will come good again. And I think that sense of perspective is really precious.
Absolutely. Wise words, wise words. Well, thank you so much for taking time to chat with me this afternoon, Lucy. Where can people find out more about you and, of course, your wonderful book?
Well, the book, luckily, it's got a super publisher. So it's published by Penguin, which is great, which means it's available everywhere. So, in fact, if you're in Germany, you can buy it in German, and you can buy it in South Korea in South Korean, and you can buy it in English in lots of other places. So, Amazon and Waterstones and any decent independent bookshop should be able to get hold of a copy. It's available on Kindle and on Audible. About me, I don't know. Quick Google, you might find something, but no, I have been very lucky. I'm a patron of Age UK Somerset, which I really love, and I get to talk to Age UK groups, and funnily enough, the WI is a very marvellous organisation. So I do potter around the country when I'm not at work, talking to some really fantastic groups. So maybe I'll see you out and about.
Absolutely. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us, myself, and all of the Retirement Cafe listeners. Thanks for your time.
Really lovely to talk to you. Thank you, Justin.
Thanks once again to Dr. Lucy Pollock for joining me today. I hope that our conversation got you thinking about the conversations that you may need to have with your own friends and family. To find out where to buy Lucy's book, check out the show notes on our website at theretirementcafe.co.uk, where of course you'll find some useful links. As ever, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please do leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It really does help. And for more interviews and retirement planning videos, you may want to check out my YouTube channel, search for Justin King MFP, or of course you can click the link in the show notes. If you want to get in touch, of course you can reach me on hello@theretirementcafe.co.uk, or you can find me on Twitter @JustinKingCFP. So until next time, I'm Justin King, helping you feel more informed in your retirement.